Hi, I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what's trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be with you as always.
There are no shortage of business stories to choose from this week. In fact, narrowing it down to just 2 or 3 was a bit of a challenge. But let's start with our national pastime. So I'm not talking about hockey here. I'm talking about housing. RE/MAX's crystal ball suggests a return to a more balanced market next year after a few years of activity that I would definitely call not balanced. What are your thoughts on this, Brett?
Well, it's important context. When they talk about a balanced housing market, what they really mean is going back to 2019 prices. These past 2 years have been so crazy for the housing market, and it's seen such inflated prices that really we're looking back to how do we get to 2019, 2018 prices, which were much more, at least according to many realtors and economists, more balanced. And so it looks like that'll likely be the case. I think we have interest rates to thank for that in a big way. But I think there'd be a big sigh of relief from collective renters across the country if we could see a more balanced housing market.
Yeah, and potential buyers as well. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. RE/MAX does say that the big wild card here is what interest rates are going to do. And there's a little bit of a silver lining here. Even though they're forecasting steep declines for the Greater Vancouver area, Kelowna and Toronto, there are some bright spots. RE/MAX actually thinks we'll see price growth in Alberta and parts of Atlantic Canada. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, if you will.
It's a mixed bag, and it shows you how severe the housing crisis is in Canada, in that you now have our biggest cities, Toronto and Vancouver, many people being priced out of them to the point where they can't even go to the suburbs now to find cheaper housing prices, but they actually have to go to different provinces outright. It's great for Alberta. Alberta's been struggling over the past decade in the decline of oil prices, but with the combination of a growth in oil prices over the past year, especially after the war in Ukraine broke out, plus this interprovincial migration that's happening, it looks like Alberta could be the big beneficiary of increased housing prices and people being priced out of Toronto and Vancouver.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, there was this notion that you could drive until you can afford to buy somewhere. And then during the pandemic, I think that kind of morphed into fly until you can afford to purchase a home somewhere. A little bit of a tough segue here into our second topic, which is that for the first time in its 87-year history, the Bank of Canada has posted a loss. So it lost $522 million in Q3, and it, like many households across the country with variable rate debt, is feeling the pinch of these steep successive rate hikes. The central bank and everything that it does, let's talk about the context here, and doesn't do, has been politicized. So that's kind of what's happening in the background. Brett, my question to you is this something that people need to worry about? Because all signs suggest this shortfall is actually temporary.
Yeah, most economists say that this is not going to impact the Bank of Canada's ability to execute on monetary policy, and primarily they're focused now on how do they bring inflation down with interest rates. I think what's interesting and the big difference between what the Bank of Canada has that many households don't is the Bank of Canada can always just print more money if they have to. And so this seems like more of an accounting problem than an actual economics or monetary policy problem. But really, if you look back to how this happened, it's because the government or the Bank of Canada was buying provincial bonds. And then what that was doing is infusing cash back into the economy through provinces that could then spend more. And now they're facing the pain of that, plus the inability to balance their budget with the increased interest rates that banks have to pay them to take money out. And so, yeah, it seems more like an accounting problem than a monetary policy problem. So hopefully it's not too big of a deal.
Yeah, and I would caution viewers to really question any rhetoric that they see where this is being framed as a bailout of the Bank of Canada. I think if you do just a little bit of research, you'll find out that that's not actually what's going on. Our final topic is a good news story. So Canadians appear to be slowly cutting back on their use of plastic grocery bags and straws ahead of a national ban on these items. That kicks in December 20th. What do you make of this, Brett?
Plastic waste is a huge issue. It's one of the biggest environmental crises that we face. And so it's great to see a transition away from single-use plastics. Now, I don't think that solves the problem. In fact, I think the bigger issue are that there are big corporations that are major polluters that are causing lots of environmental degradation in all different corners of the world. But either way, it's great to see some progress being made. And I think that we should all take it upon ourselves to do whatever we can to help resolve or help mitigate the climate crisis that we're currently seeing.
Yeah, the plastic problem that Canada has is definitely part of that. They're all kind of interrelated. It shows up in that single-use plastic that has in many ways taken over our daily lives. And I see it in the way, goods are packaged, especially if you have kids. You may have noticed that takeout containers for food. I personally have been making a big effort to be more mindful of this. We have reusable coffee traveler mugs, those reusable grocery bags and straws, but I would say I'm probably not the greatest at remembering to bring them with me all the time. And I think I've had to do some soul searching and ask myself if I take this problem seriously enough. Thoughts, Brett?
Well, that's a personal question, Anne, and I don't want to speak for you. I think what I would say is that what we have to remember is that we obviously have a personal responsibility to do everything within our power to help mitigate this crisis. But the vast majority of polluters are the corporations that are doing great damage to our environment. And so it's a collective effort that has to be done, where how do we work with companies to help them reduce their environmental footprint while at the same time doing everything that we can within our own ability to do the simple things like reducing the amount of plastic that we use or turning the lights off. I think they should all be looked at in conjunction with each other, and you shouldn't have to take all of that responsibility on you. It's one that we all need to work through together, and that I hope that we do in the future.
100%. And I hear you in terms of impact to go after the big corporations. That's where you're going to make a big dent, a meaningful dent in this particular problem. But I also think public buy-in is super important. And that starts with taking a look at what you can do in your own home, in your own community, and all the rest of it. Thank you so much for your time and your insight, Brett. Always a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Anne.
Have a great weekend. You can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It is available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.